the creatures that ruled Earth before dinosaurs. Beneath a sky heavy with ash and the distant rumble of volcanic fury, life struggled to claim every inch of the planet. Long before dinosaurs dominated, Earth belonged to amphibious titans, armored herbivores, and agile hunters, creatures whose innovations shaped the course of evolution. Rivers teemed with primitive sharks, forests echoed with nocturnal synapsids, and swamps hid relentless predators testing the limits of land and water. This was a world of adaptation, cunning, and survival against relentless change. Join us as we traverse the landscapes of pre-dinosaur Earth and uncover the lives of the creatures that once ruled it. Lords of the swamp. The giant amphibians. Mist hung low over a labyrinth of waterways, winding through dense, verdant swamps where ferns the size of small trees swayed in humid currents, and towering lycopods cast long shadows over stagnant pools. The air was thick with the scent of decaying plant matter, and the surface of the waters trembled with the subtle movements of creatures too large to go unnoticed, yet stealthy enough to glide through shadows without detection. In these wetlands of the late Carboniferous, the first true rulers of freshwater ecosystems had emerged. Colossal amphibians, whose bodies measured over 6 meters in length, armed with jaws capable of crushing prey, and limbs sturdy enough to navigate both mud and water with alarming ease. Among the most fearsome was Prionosuchus, a predator whose elongated snout bristled with rows of sharp, conical teeth, perfectly adapted for seizing fish and smaller tetrapods. Fossils of Prionosuchus indicate a skull length exceeding 1.5 meters, suggesting a total body mass approaching a ton, a scale of dominance unprecedented in vertebrate history at that time. Paleontologists have reconstructed its swimming style from the articulation of vertebrae and limb bones, revealing a creature that propelled itself with powerful side-to-side undulations of its tail while its limbs acted as stabilizers, a movement eerily reminiscent of modern crocodilians. Its eyes, positioned atop its skull, allowed it to surveil the murky waters above the surface, silently stalking prey while remaining nearly invisible to both hunter and hunted. Beneath the water, currents carried the vibrations of smaller animals, and the amphibians' lateral line systems, sensory organs similar to those of fish, detected the slightest disturbances. Eriops, another giant, though smaller than Prionosuchus, reached lengths of up to 2 meters and possessed robust, muscular limbs that enabled it to haul itself onto muddy banks, a dual adaptation that allowed it to exploit resources in both aquatic and terrestrial zones. Its teeth, blunt yet formidable, suggest a diet not limited to fish, but also including insects, smaller amphibians, and perhaps the occasional invertebrate unlucky enough to venture near the water's edge. Fossilized remains of Eriops often show healed injuries, implying that these giants engaged in intraspecific combat, a behavior hinting at territorial disputes or competition for mates. The wetlands themselves were a canvas of ecological complexity, with shallow lagoons, sinuous rivers, and ephemeral pools providing niches for a variety of creatures. Dense mats of vegetation slowed the flow of water, creating pockets of quiet refuge for juvenile amphibians and tiny fish, which in turn attracted larger predators. Carboniferous sediments reveal layers of organic material interspersed with fossilized trackways, showing the interaction between plant growth, water levels, and animal activity over millennia. Paleobotanical studies indicate that the towering lycopods and seed ferns not only dominated the canopy, but also contributed to the acidic, oxygen-poor water that shaped the composition of aquatic life, giving amphibians an evolutionary edge over less adaptable vertebrates. The life cycles of these amphibians were intimately tied to the watery world around them. Eggs were laid in shallow pools, where they hatched into larvae equipped with gills, mirroring the developmental patterns of modern amphibians. These juveniles underwent a gradual transformation, developing lungs and limbs capable of terrestrial locomotion, a process that could span months in the fluctuating temperatures and oxygen levels of carboniferous swamps. Fossilized larval forms suggest high mortality rates, with only a fraction surviving to adulthood, reinforcing the importance of size and predatory skill for survival. The survivors, growing into giants, would assume roles as apex predators, controlling population dynamics and shaping the evolutionary pressures on both prey species and competing amphibians. Recent discoveries in the Paraná Basin of Brazil and North America's Texas and Oklahoma regions have provided remarkably complete pre-dinosaur skeletons, allowing paleontologists to reconstruct not just anatomy but behavior. Analysis of the vertebral column shows evidence of flexibility in the tail, hinting at swift underwater attacks, while the limb bone's attachment points suggest bursts of strength sufficient for brief excursions onto land. Isotopic studies of fossilized bones further indicate seasonal variations in diet, implying that these amphibians adjusted their hunting strategies in response to water levels and prey availability, a sophisticated ecological understanding that belies their ancient origins. Predation was not one-dimensional. Fossilized coprolites attributed to giant amphibians contain fragments of fish scales, small vertebrae, and occasional plant matter, indicating opportunistic feeding habits and the capacity to exploit multiple trophic levels. This versatility likely contributed to their prolonged dominance across diverse freshwater environments. At night, when the swamps were cloaked in mist and the sun's heat retreated, these giants became even more efficient hunters, their sensory adaptations allowing them to detect faint ripples and subtle chemical cues in the water, turning darkness into a hunting advantage. Yet these titans were not invincible. Periodic droughts and shifts in sedimentation altered the swamp landscapes, forcing populations to migrate, adapt, or perish. Fossil evidence of mass die-offs, identified through densely packed skeletal deposits, suggests that while these amphibians ruled, they remained at the mercy of the environment they so effectively dominated. Their rise and decline illustrate the fragile balance between evolutionary success and ecological vulnerability, a tension that would echo through the ages as new forms of life began to explore terrestrial habitats. The Carboniferous wetlands were also arenas of evolutionary experimentation, where traits that would later define reptiles and mammals first began to emerge in amphibian lineages. Limb morphology and jaw mechanics hint at selective pressures favouring stronger terrestrial movement and diversified diets. The dominance of these giants, both in size and predatory influence, created ecological pressures that paved the way for the next wave of vertebrates, smaller, faster, and more adaptable species that would exploit the drying floodplains and emerging forests beyond the swamps. From these watery giants, the story of life subtly shifted, as the first claims were made on solid ground, signalling the dawn of terrestrial rulers who would eventually inherit the Earth's dry landscapes. Even as the last of the Prionosuchus disappeared into the fossil record, leaving only fragmented bones and whispered traces in sediment, the legacy of these colossal amphibians lingered in the DNA of ecological design. In the very structures of aquatic and semi-aquatic life, their reign demonstrated that dominance is never permanent, yet the strategies they employed, ambush predation, versatile locomotion, and environmental attunement, would echo in the evolution of later reptiles and the first tetrapods that truly mastered the land. hinting at a world poised for transformation beyond the waters they once ruled. Scuttling titans, the arthropod overlords. Amid the damp murk of the Carboniferous undergrowth, the shadows of immense wings sliced through the humid air, stirring clouds of spores and the scent of decaying vegetation. Every clearing shimmered with the glint of translucent membranes, each flutter and beat a silent testament to a world ruled not by vertebrates, but by creatures encased in chitin, moving with precision, honed over tens of millions of years. These were the scuttling titans, arthropods of extraordinary proportions, whose dominance stretched from the forest floor to the canopy, where the air itself became a hunting ground. Dragonflies the size of small hawks, Meganeura, patrolled the mist-laden rivers and open glades, their wingspans reaching an astonishing 70 centimeters. Fossil reconstructions revealed delicate yet powerful veins supporting these aerial predators, capable of precise maneuvers that allowed them to intercept prey mid-flight. Their compound eyes, sprawling across the sides of their elongated heads, provided panoramic vision, enabling detection of even the slightest ripple of movement below. Such visual acuity, coupled with rapid wing beats, made Meganeura formidable hunters, capturing early insects and even smaller amphibians that ventured too close to the edges of their hunting grounds. Elevated oxygen concentrations in the Carboniferous atmosphere, estimated at 35%, nearly 50% higher than today, allowed arthropods to reach sizes unimaginable in modern ecosystems. Tracheal systems, which deliver oxygen directly to tissues, could support these massive bodies without the circulatory limitations faced by vertebrates. This atmospheric abundance facilitated both skeletal and muscular development in insects and myriapods, allowing creatures such as Arthropleura to thrive across the forest floor. Measuring over 2 meters in length, this millipede-like giant possessed segmented armored plates that protected it from predators while enabling efficient locomotion across uneven terrain. Across the damp leaf litter, Arthropleura scuttled with hundreds of legs moving in coordinated waves, each step crushing fallen plant matter, recycling nutrients, and shaping the forest floor as an ecosystem engineer. Fossil trackways, discovered in North America and Europe, show repeated paths across sediment, indicating territoriality, foraging patterns, and perhaps seasonal migrations. Unlike the lumbering amphibians of nearby swamps, these arthropods moved with relentless efficiency, their exoskeletons simultaneously offering structural support and defense against the few predators daring enough to challenge them. While vertebrates struggled with sprawling limbs and weight-bearing limitations on the soft soils of Carboniferous forests, arthropods exploited every niche, burrowing into decaying logs, climbing vegetation, or taking flight above it all. Juvenile Arthropleura shared habitats with smaller insects and amphibians, but even they exhibited rapid growth, molting periodically to expand their armored bodies and maintain their competitive edge. Predatory pressures shaped their evolution as well. Fossils show evidence of damaged exoskeletal segments and healed injuries, revealing a life of constant interaction with both environment and rivals. Ambush and pursuit defined the daily rhythm of aerial hunters like Meganeura. Prey approached cautiously, often unaware that the air itself was lethal. Detailed studies of wing morphology and fossilized musculature suggest these giant insects could hover, accelerate suddenly, and make sharp turns, behavior consistent with high-speed aerial predation. Their diet was opportunistic, ranging from smaller arthropods to tiny vertebrates that ventured within reach, while their very presence influenced the movement and habitat selection of every other creature sharing the canopy and riverbanks. Tiny arachnids and centipede-like myriapods contributed to this teeming network of dominance, each species experimenting with body plan and lifestyle. Silk production in early arachnids allowed novel strategies for trapping prey or creating protective retreats, while elongated segments in myriapods enabled flexible navigation through dense litter and narrow spaces. The forest floor was a living laboratory where evolution tested new morphologies and behaviors that would persist across millions of years, and fossils reveal staggering diversity of form and function, from spiny exoskeletons to multi-jointed legs built for speed. Fossilized trackways and burrow patterns, preserved in fine-grained sediment, allow paleontologists to reconstruct precise movement and behavior. Parallel grooves left by Arthropleura indicate consistent stride length and coordination, while overlapping impressions hint at interactions between multiple individuals. The density of these tracks within small areas suggests both abundance and complex social or spatial behavior, a network of activity invisible to the casual observer but etched into stone for posterity. These discoveries reveal not only the size and presence of these arthropods, but also the intricate ecological roles they played in shaping Carboniferous environments. The very air, saturated with oxygen, became a crucible for gigantism, amplifying selective pressures across invertebrate life. Exoskeletal reinforcement, sensory refinement, and locomotor efficiency combined to create animals capable of extraordinary feats. Whether it was Meganeura snatching prey mid-flight or Arthropleura tearing through decaying logs, each adaptation reinforced dominance in its niche, creating ecosystems where vertebrate pioneers were constrained by gravity and skeletal limitations, while arthropods moved with unmatched freedom and resilience. Amid a forest alive with motion, arthropods' influence compelled vertebrates to adapt, reshaping mobility, size, and strategy. Amphibians adapted to terrestrial niches with caution, avoiding encounters with armored or airborne predators, while early tetrapods experimented with speed, climbing ability, and stealth. The success of these invertebrate titans demonstrates that ecological supremacy does not always correlate with size alone. Rather, it arises from the ability to exploit environmental opportunities with specialized adaptations and unyielding persistence. While scuttling and flying titans dominated the Carboniferous world, their reign foreshadowed the evolutionary pressures shaping terrestrial vertebrates. The forests they ruled became arenas of competition, experimentation, and selective challenge, where air, soil, and vegetation were meticulously surveyed, navigated, and exploited. From these immense arthropods, the first vertebrates learned the limits of sprawling limbs and the advantages of agility, setting the stage for a gradual reclamation of land by creatures that would one day eclipse these insect and myriapod overlords in both mobility and innovation, bridging the gap between swamp, soil, and forest canopy in a world still dominated by the scuttling titans, masters of the land. Early tetrapod predators. The edges of the water shivered as limbs met solid earth, each step sending tremors through the soft floodplain and stirring the undergrowth with delicate vibrations that echoed through roots and leaves alike. For the first vertebrates leaving the safety of the shallows, every movement was a test of balance and resolve, as muscles strained against mud and claws sought purchase on unpredictable terrain. Water dripped from tails and flanks, connecting the liquid world behind them with the uncertain earth before, a world alive with unseen threats and hidden prey alike. The floodplain was a place of tension, where survival demanded both patience and daring, and where every step could signal the presence of opportunity or peril. Ichthyostega pressed forward, tail sweeping through shallow channels, while claws gripped slippery mud, muscles coiling with every uncertain step. Limbs bent and straightened, in careful sequence, shifting weight from joint to joint, testing the firmness of each patch of soil while propelling the body forward with surprising agility. The creature's wide head scanned the surroundings, nostrils flaring to capture humid scents rising from the forest floor, and eyes darting to every flicker of movement in ferns or fallen fronds. Water and land merged in a fluid continuum as these early tetrapods bridged habitats, mastering the tension between buoyancy and gravity with every controlled motion. Limbs extended and flexed like living scaffolds, balancing weight across uneven terrain while every joint worked in unison to propel the body forward. The musculature along the shoulders and hips tensed and relaxed rhythmically, enabling bursts of speed when necessary, while tails swished to maintain balance and stability over slick or uneven surfaces. Clawed digits pressed into mud and soft sediment, leaving fleeting impressions as the animal tested its own strength and coordination. Every excursion onto firm ground represented an experiment in terrestrial conquest, a learning curve dictated by gravity, friction, and the ever-present risk of predation. Jaws snapped with sudden precision, capturing insects and small amphibians that ventured too close to the water's brink. Sharp teeth punctured exoskeletons or soft flesh with lethal efficiency, delivering rapid, decisive kills. The act of hunting was a choreography of patience and reflex, as the tetrapods lay in wait at the junction of water and land, waiting for prey to wander within striking distance. Occasionally, a smaller competitor or rival tetrapod intruded, prompting short-lived skirmishes resolved through thrusts, bites, or rapid retreats, each encounter honing instinct and coordination. Towering ferns and dense lycopods formed a labyrinth beneath which arthropods scuttled, yet the tetrapods' steady, deliberate movements allowed them to navigate these hazards with cautious authority. They stepped lightly where necessary, tested surfaces before committing weight, and adjusted posture constantly to negotiate obstacles. Each forest floor expedition revealed new hunting opportunities and fresh dangers, from armored millipedes to sudden winged predators, demanding flexibility and continuous awareness. This was a land alive with both menace and sustenance, where survival depended on adaptability, patience, and physical mastery. Eyes darted to shifting shadows, nostrils flared against humid air, and vibrations through soft soil alerted the creatures to the presence of potential threats or prey. The lateral line remnants in their heads still responded to ripples in water, while the senses adapted for air began to dominate, guiding steps across mud, vegetation, and rocks. The tetrapods' nervous systems coordinated these sensory inputs with muscular action, producing precise movements that allowed effective stalking, ambush, and retreat in equal measure. Life on land required constant attention, as even a single misstep could mean the difference between a successful hunt and a costly injury. Tentatively, they advanced deeper onto floodplains, where seasonal water levels revealed patches of firm soil, fallen logs, and shallow pools, each presenting new challenges and opportunities. These vertebrates tested each substrate, adjusted limb angles for grip, and deployed tails as stabilizers or rudders in shallow water. Every small triumph, crossing a muddy patch, seizing a crustacean, avoiding an arthropod ambush, built the knowledge and skill needed to navigate increasingly terrestrial terrain. The floodplains themselves became classrooms, teaching these pioneers the rules of land that water had never imposed. Encounters with rivals or competitors erupted in sudden bursts of speed, threatening lunges or swift retreats, each interaction testing strength, strategy, and endurance. Even minor conflicts shaped behavior, refining muscle memory, coordination, and timing. Dominance was asserted not only through aggression, but through the ability to read environmental cues, anticipate prey, and evade larger predators. In this web of interactions, tetrapods gradually claimed niches where size, speed, and ingenuity mattered more than raw force alone. Every movement demanded coordination of senses and limbs, as imbalance or misjudgment could turn an opportunity for food into a perilous misstep. Muscles, joints, and sensory perception worked as a single unit, allowing bursts of movement over logs, around pools, or into dense vegetation. Hunting became a test of patience and precision, locomotion a continuous negotiation with the land itself. These early vertebrates were both predators and students of their environment, shaping and reshaping strategies with each challenge the floodplains presented. Step by step, hunt by hunt, these early vertebrates edged toward mastery of the land, honing skills and adaptations that would set the stage for the emergence of fully terrestrial predators in the eras to come. They learned the limits of sprawling limbs and the advantages of stability, the subtleties of ambush, and the art of navigating a three-dimensional world of water, mud, and plant cover. With each successful hunt, they became more attuned to the rhythms of land, gaining the precision, strength, and awareness necessary to eventually eclipse their arthropod contemporaries. In this dynamic dance between water and earth, the first true masters of land slowly emerged, heralding a transformation that would redefine life on terrestrial landscapes for millions of years. The armor-bearers, early plant-eating reptiles. Sunlight filtered through towering lycopods as armored reptiles moved with deliberate care along the fringe of dense undergrowth, scanning for movement and listening to subtle vibrations through the soil. Each cautious step pressed claws into damp earth, sending minute tremors through roots and fallen leaves, alerting both predator and prey to the rhythms of life in the carboniferous forests. The air was thick with humidity, and the scent of decaying vegetation mingled with the faint odors of neighboring creatures, creating a sensory tapestry that the reptiles read with instinctive precision. Every shadow, every rustle of foliage demanded attention, and the armored herbivores responded with a careful mix of patience and readiness. Thick plates and spiny ridges traced the contours of their backs, each armored segment glinting faintly in the shifting light, while limbs flexed to carry substantial weight without losing mobility. Muscles beneath the tough outer scales rippled as they moved, adapting to uneven terrain and the constant pull of gravity on their reinforced bodies. Each armored segment served a dual purpose: protection against the snap of jaws and claws, and a counterweight, stabilizing the body over soft soil and shallow pools. Even as predators lurked nearby, these reptiles could advance with measured confidence, relying on their defenses to grant them a quiet authority across the forest floor. Muscles beneath the armored plates flexed in subtle waves, allowing the reptiles to twist, pivot, and even climb gentle slopes despite the heavy protective coating. Their tails acted as counterbalances, swinging in measured arcs to stabilize movement across uneven forest floors and shallow streams. Beyond protection, the ridges and plates may have played a role in intraspecies communication, reflecting dappled sunlight to signal presence, alert companions, or warn rivals without exposing themselves to predators. The surfaces of scales glimmered with natural oils that repelled water and mud, keeping the armor both functional and light enough to permit prolonged foraging or migration. In this way, defense and mobility coexisted, demonstrating a sophisticated balance that allowed these herbivores to patrol territories, navigate floodplains, and respond dynamically to the ever-present threats of their world. Heads dipped repeatedly toward ferns and seed ferns, jaws opening to strip foliage, while bodies shifted slowly, testing footing and conserving energy for sudden threats. Teeth scraped and nipped at leaves, and every bite required careful coordination of neck muscles and limb placement to maintain balance. Seasonal shifts had altered the availability of preferred plants, so each meal was both a nutritional choice and a calculated move within a broader spatial strategy. While grazing, the reptile's senses remained alert, monitoring vibrations, scents, and subtle shifts in light to detect nearby predators or rivals. When shadows flickered across the forest floor, tails lashed and armored flanks braced as predators prowled near, forcing a slow but purposeful retreat to safety. Even a partially obscured silhouette could trigger defensive reactions, as reflexive muscle tensing and minor shifts in stance prepared the body to absorb impact or pivot away from danger. Predators learned to exploit the armor's limitations, approaching from angles that minimize resistance or targeting areas between plates, creating an ongoing evolutionary dialogue between defense and attack. The armored reptile's deliberate movements and keen instincts turned each encounter into a high-stakes negotiation of survival. Waterlogged patches and fallen logs became both obstacles and protective barriers, guiding movement and shaping the paths these reptiles took through the forest. Each obstacle demanded subtle adjustments of limbs, tail, and body weight, forcing a continuous recalibration of posture and trajectory. Pools reflected dappled light, and the reptiles used these shallow depressions not only as hydration sources, but as strategic buffers against pursuit. Fallen logs offered partial cover, allowing herbivores to pause, feed, and assess threats without fully exposing themselves to prowling hunters. Eyes flicked toward distant rustles, nostrils flared to detect scents carried on humid breezes, and muscles tensed in readiness to spring, turn, or shield vulnerable areas. The sensory apparatus of these reptiles had evolved to integrate multiple inputs simultaneously, allowing them to anticipate danger and respond before an attack fully materialized. Every shift in posture, every deliberate glance or flick of the tail, was informed by a constant reading of the environment, as predators and competitors alike probed the limits of armored bodies with both stealth and aggression. Seasonal changes altered terrain, revealing mudflats, dry patches, and richer grazing areas, and the reptiles adjusted their routes and feeding strategies accordingly. During wet seasons, the creatures favored firmer patches near rising streams, navigating carefully to avoid slipping or becoming trapped in soft sediment. In drier months, they moved towards sun-exposed clearings where ferns and low-lying plants were abundant, balancing exposure with the risk of predator encounters. Each movement across the changing landscape was an exercise in judgment, coordination, and the subtle interplay between opportunity and danger. Groups of herbivores moved in cautious proximity, sensing rivals and companions through posture, subtle displays, and slow, deliberate movement, balancing cooperation with competition. Individuals maintained space to minimize resource competition while remaining close enough to detect threats through shared environmental cues. Occasional sparring between rivals or mild posturing reinforced hierarchy without escalating to destructive conflict, creating a rhythm of coexistence across the forest floor. Even in these slow, measured interactions, survival depended on vigilance, awareness, and subtle physical communication. Every step was a negotiation between vulnerability and protection, as armored plates and spines offered security but limited speed. forcing these reptiles to constantly anticipate the approach of predators. A sudden rustle might prompt a swift pivot or a calculated retreat behind dense ferns or shallow pools, while a misjudged movement could leave a flank exposed. Life for these early herbivores was a continuous balance of caution and necessity, a measured dance dictated by predator pressure, terrain, and the constraints of armor. With vigilance and measured movement, these armored plant eaters navigated forests teeming with hunters, setting the stage for a shift in predatory strategy that favored speed, agility, and cunning over brute force. Each successful escape, each secured meal, reinforced the interplay of defense and survival, as armored herbivores became both architects and participants in the dynamic, predator-rich world around them. In these ancient forests, every day was a lesson in the tension between protection and opportunity, foreshadowing the rise of hunters that would rely on speed and precision to dominate the land in the eras to come. Fanged hunters of the Permian. A flash of movement through the ferns revealed the outline of a predator whose presence bent the forest into silent tension. The gorgonopsid prowled along the edge of a sun-dappled clearing, muscles coiled beneath taut skin, claws pressing lightly into damp earth as if testing the response of the forest itself. Every leaf, every fallen branch, seemed to register its passage, vibrating under the predator's weight and alerting smaller creatures to the invisible rhythm of its approach. Humidity clung to the air, mingling with the metallic scent of disturbed vegetation, as the hunter's elongated canines caught the faint gleam of sunlight, promising swift and decisive strikes. Muscles coiled beneath sleek skin as limbs carried the gorgonopsid with a sinuous grace, jaws opening to expose elongated canine blades honed for precision strikes. Spine and tail moved in a counterpoint of balance, a choreography that allowed sudden acceleration or subtle pivots without sacrificing stealth. The predator's head angled constantly, aligning each tooth, each step, with the invisible trajectory of its prey, while every sinew and joint flexed in concert to maintain readiness for explosive movement. Even in stillness, the body radiated tension, a perfect equilibrium between potential energy and lethal intent. Shadows shifted as the predator moved carefully, nostrils flaring and ears twitching to detect even the faintest vibrations of prey across mud and leaf litter. Tiny ripples in a shallow pool betrayed the approach of an armored herbivore, while rustles from the undergrowth hinted at more agile tetrapods cautiously grazing nearby. The gorgonopsid read these signals with uncanny precision, combining sight, smell, and vibration to map its surroundings, as if the forest itself had become an extension of its nervous system. Each footfall was deliberate, each pause calculated, a dance of anticipation that made the predator appear at once patient and inevitable. In a sudden burst of speed, the predator lunged, claws digging into soft soil and tail balancing momentum as the powerful jaws closed on unsuspecting herbivores. Plates and spikes clashed under the force of impact, but even these defenses were often too slow to deflect the lightning strike of tooth and claw. Muscles rippled along the predator's limbs and back as it twisted and drove forward, combining agility, timing, and raw strength in a single fluid motion. The prey's attempt to pivot, to flee, met the unyielding precision of a predator whose body was designed for these moments. Honed by generations of survival on land still contested by armored and wary herbivores. Armored herbivores braced against strikes, relying on protective plates and evasive turns, each interaction highlighting the interplay of offense and defense. Some managed to twist or duck behind obstacles, their spines and scales rattling under near misses, while others fell, their struggle brief but telling of the predator's dominance. In these encounters, the gorgonopsid's tactics were refined. Jaws aimed for soft tissue, limbs used to pin or destabilize, and eyes tracking every subtle movement that might reveal weakness. The dance of predator and prey became a lesson in strategy, anticipation, and the evolutionary arms race written across living bodies rather than sediment. Eyes flicked to subtle rustles, whiskers, and vibrissae registering minute disturbances, while the predator's nostrils sampled complex scents carried on humid air. Even wind direction played a role. Inhaling the slightest hint of an approaching threat or prey shaped each movement, dictating when to pause, crouch, or lunge. The Gorgonopsid's senses extended its awareness far beyond immediate vision, integrating vibrations in the soil, scent trails, and auditory clues into a single, continuous map of opportunity and risk. In these forests, the ability to interpret environmental subtleties determined life or death in ways both immediate and profound. Rival Gorgonopsids circled or charged, testing strength and asserting dominance without wasting energy on unnecessary conflict, communicating authority with controlled snarls, precise posturing, and deliberate strikes. Social hierarchy was fluid, yet codified in gestures and displays that minimized confrontation while establishing territory and breeding rights. Competition for prey and mating opportunity unfolded alongside predation itself, creating a constant tension where each predator balanced aggression with strategic restraint. Even in dominance, survival demanded finesse as much as brute force. Floodplains, fallen logs, and seasonal water channels challenged hunting strategies, forcing hunters to balance speed, stealth, and stability with every step. A sudden mudflat could sap momentum, a low-lying log could conceal a prey animal or provide a sudden advantage. Seasonal rains reshaped the terrain daily, revealing new hunting corridors and forcing predators to constantly revise mental maps of opportunity and risk. This intimate knowledge of the land allowed Gorgonopsids to traverse terrain as fluidly as their prey, blending agility and experience in an ever-changing landscape. Every successful hunt, every narrowly avoided misstep, reinforced the predator's mastery of terrain, senses, and prey behavior, ensuring its apex status in a world of constant challenge. Lessons were etched not into stone but into muscle memory, instinctive awareness, and the very strategies that allowed survival amid a dense forest teeming with armored herbivores and agile tetrapods. Speed, precision, patience, and timing intertwined seamlessly, each hunt a testament to evolutionary specialization and the relentless pressure of life on land. Life and death whispered through the forest, and even these formidable hunters foreshadowed the upheavals to come, where extinction and survival would reset the stage for a new wave of terrestrial dominance. The Gorgonopsids' reign would persist, shaping the behavior and evolution of every creature they hunted, until forces beyond their control, shifts in climate, catastrophic events, and the relentless march of ecological transformation would reorder the world. In the tension of predator and prey, agility and armor, life and death, the stage was set for the survivors of catastrophe to inherit a land forged by the teeth, claws, and instincts of these ancient masters. The mammal-like titans, therapsid giants. Emerging from the recovering Permian landscapes, the mammal-like giants, massive therapsids such as Estemenosuchus and Antiosaurus, traversed floodplains and sparse woodlands with deliberate power. Estemenosuchus, broad-bodied and equipped with cranial bosses, moved with a stability that belied its bulk, while Antiosaurus, carnivorous and formidable, flexed powerful limbs to negotiate uneven terrain with astonishing coordination. These giants dominated both open plains and river corridors, their size forcing smaller vertebrates to navigate cautiously around every footprint and shadow. Waterholes and streams reflected the enormous silhouettes of these creatures, while the subtle rumble of their movement displaced air, vegetation, and occasionally opportunistic amphibians. Muscles coiled beneath thick skin as limbs splayed to support immense weight, tails swinging low for counterbalance across mudflats, rocky outcrops, and fallen trees. Shoulder and hip joints flexed in precise synchronization, permitting fluid movement despite the mass pressing down. Every step demanded awareness of gravity, terrain, and the subtle resistance of soft mud, demonstrating locomotor strategies optimized over millions of years. Their gait combined sheer strength with agility, allowing both herbivorous and carnivorous therapsids to traverse challenging habitats while conserving energy for hunting, foraging, or territorial displays. Heads swiveled constantly, nostrils flaring and ears twitching to catch every sound of nearby movement. Eyes reflected filtered sunlight, scanning for prey, rivals, or subtle environmental cues, while jaws flexed in anticipation of feeding. Ankylosaurus displayed predatory calculation, moving with stealth despite its size, whereas Etemenosuchus surveyed vegetation with deliberate chewing and cautious steps, balancing nutrient intake against exposure to threat. Every movement, from the flick of a tail to the rotation of a limb, was purposeful, blending observation, reaction, and latent power. Teeth reflected dietary specialization. Ankylosaurus wielded massive canines to seize and slice prey, while Etemenosuchus possessed robust, grinding molars suited for tough Permian plants. Jaws worked in precise coordination with neck and head movements to optimize intake and energy use. Foraging routes often followed streams and water-rich corridors, maximizing access to diverse food sources while minimizing exposure to competitors. Each feeding session was a lesson in efficiency and environmental attunement, balancing caloric gain with risk management across complex landscapes. Streams and seasonal waterholes guided daily movement, channeling therapsids through zones of abundance and scarcity. Drinking demanded care. Massive feet displaced soft banks with a squelch, while ripples betrayed hidden amphibians or reptiles, forcing adjustments in posture and approach. Occasional foraging along river edges allowed access to aquatic plants, roots, and low-lying foliage, integrating multiple food types into a single expedition. In this, they displayed remarkable ecological awareness, modulating behavior to maximize survival and resource use. Patches of thick, possibly insulating skin or early proto-fur rippled with movement, aiding thermoregulation across fluctuating temperatures. Sun-warmed surfaces countered cooler waters, while breath misted in early morning air as circulation maintained core heat. Subtle postural shifts, pressing against logs, angling heads, raising limbs, helped regulate temperature and energy expenditure. These physiological and behavioral strategies allowed the mammal-like titans to maintain dominance despite environmental extremes that challenged smaller, less resilient vertebrates. Social and dominance displays governed interactions among peers. Tail flicks, cranial posturing, and deliberate movements communicated size, strength, and territory boundaries. Aggressive confrontations were rare. Intent and hierarchy were expressed visually, reducing the risk of injury among these enormous, heavily muscled creatures. Signals were understood by coexisting species, both vertebrate competitors and prey, shaping behavior and movement in the broader ecosystem without the need for combat. Vocalizations and subtle sounds filled the air as these therapsid giants communicated across vast stretches of land. In addition to visual displays, Etemenosuchus and Ankylosaurus likely used low-frequency grunts, hisses, and rumbling noises to signal territory, warn of predators, or coordinate movement within groups. These auditory cues traveled far across open plains, reaching peers before visual contact was possible, allowing for coordinated feeding, mating displays, or avoidance of conflict. Vibrational communication may also have been employed, with heavy footsteps sending signals through soil and vegetation, alerting nearby creatures to their presence without the need for constant visual monitoring. Such behaviors suggest complex social interactions and environmental awareness, revealing that dominance was as much about subtle signaling as it was about sheer size and force. Small vertebrates adjusted their behavior in response to these giants, skittering, fleeing, or opportunistically following trails for dislodged plant matter or carrion. The mammal-like titans effectively redefined territory through presence alone, influencing patterns of vegetation use, predator-prey interactions, and foraging dynamics. Their influence extended beyond individual encounters, shaping the rhythms of life across diverse habitats and establishing them as keystones in Permian ecosystems. Rivers, mudflats, and uneven forest edges challenged movement, requiring careful coordination of limbs, tail, and balance. Missteps in mud could sap momentum, while rocks and logs demanded precise placement of each foot. Yet these giants adapted gracefully, their immense bodies flexing in surprisingly agile ways, demonstrating locomotor sophistication that would set evolutionary foundations for later mammals. Seasonal flooding and shifting water levels prompted strategic changes in daily routes, feeding, and resting patterns, reflecting an ongoing negotiation with a dynamic environment. Every step, grazing bout, and pause revealed evolutionary experimentation in posture, musculature, and sensory integration. Limbs and jaws combined reflex with anticipation, while tail and spine maintained balance and stability, and sensory systems integrated multiple inputs to guide real-time decision-making. These living strategies foreshadowed mammalian efficiency, adaptability, and environmental awareness, expressed vividly in the daily life of creatures that bridged reptilian ancestry and mammalian potential. In this transformed world, Estominosuchus, Antiosaurus, and other therapsid giants ruled with both presence and precision, their adaptations allowing smaller survivors to exploit niches and pave the way for future vertebrate diversity. Dominance was transient, but impact was profound. Vegetation patterns, prey behavior, and interspecies interactions were all molded by these titans. As environmental change and extinction loomed, they exemplified the delicate balance of power, size, and adaptation, illuminating the pathways that would eventually give rise to true mammals, agile, aware, and inheritors of landscapes first mastered by these towering predecessors, the armored sea kings, placoderm fishes. Even as the last mammal-like titans moved across floodplains and river margins, life beneath the waves followed its own path of dominance. In the Devonian seas, armored placoderms, such as Dunkleosteus, Bothrialepis, and Kokosteus, asserted authority over reefs, estuaries, and shallow coastal zones. Their bodies evolved for both protection and predation. These fish navigated complex underwater landscapes, scanning for prey or competitors with eyes adapted to shifting light and lateral line systems attuned to subtle vibrations. Their armored heads and thoraxes allowed powerful bites and defense against rivals, establishing them as apex predators in aquatic ecosystems, while terrestrial vertebrates honed mastery over land. Dunkleosteus, one of the largest known placoderms, reached lengths of up to 10 meters, its head encased in interlocking bony plates that functioned as natural armor, shielding vital organs, while concentrating bite force into shearing edges capable of slicing through other armored fishes. Mid-sized species, like Cunning, exhibited jointed head and thorax plates that allowed subtle head rotation for precise strikes against smaller prey, demonstrating a sophisticated balance between protection and predatory agility. Smaller benthic species, such as Bothriolepis, maneuvered along sediment-covered floors and among submerged vegetation, feeding on detritus, mollusks, and small crustaceans while relying on flattened, armored bodies for protection against larger predators. Movement in water required coordinated effort between heavy exoskeletons and muscular propulsion. Large placoderms used powerful caudal fins for bursts of speed, while pectoral and pelvic fins provided fine-tuned stability during precise movements. These adaptations allowed apex predators to ambush prey efficiently and mid-sized species to maintain agility, showing that dominance in Devonian seas depended on both protection and mobility. Muscular control combined with jointed armor permitted controlled turns and sudden lunges, illustrating the evolutionary refinement of locomotion in a fully aquatic predator. Jaw mechanics alone reveal the engineering marvels of these armored giants, with bite forces calculated to rival modern sharks in relative strength. In Dunkleosteus, two-part bony plates functioned like self-sharpening shears, allowing it to crush shells and sever heavily armored prey in a single strike. Bite speed was astonishing, closing in as little as 20-30 milliseconds, a precision that demanded exact coordination of musculature and jointed armor. Smaller placoderms like Bothriolepis, by contrast, relied on slower, grinding bites. Specialized for detritus and soft-bodied invertebrates, illustrating the evolutionary trade-offs between protection, mobility, and feeding strategy. These adaptations not only defined predatory hierarchies, but also drove shifts in prey populations, shaping the evolutionary trajectory of Devonian marine life. Feeding strategies were diverse and highly specialized. Dunkleosteus preyed on armored fishes and other vertebrates, cracking shells and exoskeletons with its reinforced jaw plates, while Cunning could seize smaller fish or soft-bodied invertebrates with calculated precision. Bothriolepis, by contrast, grazed on sediment and small benthic invertebrates, using its specialized jaw structures to filter and crush food. Such dietary differentiation minimized competition among coexisting placoderms, highlighting the emergence of ecological niches and early food web stratification in aquatic communities. Placoderms also played critical roles in structuring their ecosystems. Grazing species like Bothriolepis disturbed sediment, releasing nutrients that supported algae and microbial mats, which in turn sustained invertebrates and smaller fish. Apex predators, like Dunkleosteus, regulated populations of other fish species, shaping prey behavior and spatial distribution. These armored fishes acted as both architects and regulators, demonstrating that dominance extended beyond mere predation to the management of resources and community composition in underwater environments. Sensory systems provided another layer of adaptation. The lateral line system detected minute water movements, alerting fish to the presence of prey, predators, or environmental changes. Eyes positioned dorsally allowed simultaneous monitoring of benthic zones and open water, providing advantages in ambush and foraging strategies. Jointed head shields permitted rotation without moving the entire body, allowing precise targeting even in cluttered reef habitats or murky waters, enhancing both hunting success and predator avoidance. Reproductive strategies further reinforced their ecological success. Evidence suggests some smaller placoderms laid eggs in sheltered, shallow areas, while others may have exhibited live birth, ensuring that juveniles avoided the highest predation risks. Less armored juveniles relied on dense vegetation, crevices, or social grouping for protection, showing how life stage and morphology interacted with habitat to maximize survival. Seasonal patterns influence breeding and juvenile dispersal, reflecting the interconnectedness of life cycles, resource availability, and environmental fluctuations. Social and competitive interactions involved more than combat. Dominance was often expressed through posturing, circling, or displays of armored surfaces, reducing the risk of injury while asserting territorial or feeding claims. Aggregations of mid-sized species formed schools that improved predator detection and allowed coordinated movement across reefs and estuaries. Even in solitary apex hunters, body size and armor communicated presence, influencing access to prey and mates and reinforcing ecological hierarchies in these dynamic underwater communities. Environmental conditions shaped daily behavior and distribution. Shallow reefs, deep channels, estuarine flows, and sediment composition all dictated foraging, resting, and ambush strategies. Currents affected swimming efficiency, while seasonal freshwater inflows altered salinity and food availability. Placoderms adjusted their posture, fin orientation, and movement patterns to optimize energy use, demonstrating sophisticated environmental awareness and real-time behavioral integration with the surrounding ecosystem. Microhabitat selection was as critical as size or armor, guiding where placoderms rested, hunted, and reproduced within sprawling reef complexes. Species partitioned the environment, with benthic grazers navigating sand flats and shallow estuarine channels, while mid-sized predators patrolled reef edges and sheltered nooks. And apex hunters like Dunkleosteus claimed expansive territories in open waters. Water temperature, salinity, and oxygen levels further dictated movement patterns, forcing fish to optimize activity for both metabolic efficiency and predatory success. Juveniles often sought dense vegetation or crevices for protection, demonstrating that survival depended as much on environmental awareness as on physical adaptations. In this way, behavior, physiology, and habitat are intertwined, producing finely tuned strategies that governed life in Devonian seas. The evolution of armor among placoderms illustrates a balance between protection and functional mobility. Heavily plated bodies minimized vulnerability but imposed energetic costs, influencing feeding strategies, predator-prey interactions, and movement across complex habitats. Across species, this selective pressure produced diverse forms: benthic grazers like Bothrialepis, mid-sized agile predators like Cocosteus, and apex hunters like Dunkleosteus. Together, these fishes established an underwater hierarchy that shaped Devonian ecosystems and set a precedent for vertebrate dominance in aquatic environments, illustrating the interplay of anatomy, behavior, and ecology that would echo through evolutionary history. The first flyers, pterygote insects, taking to the sky demanded innovation beyond muscle and bone, and the first winged insects achieved it with startling elegance. In the dense forests and swampy plains of the late Carboniferous, small exoskeletal bodies took to the air, transforming terrestrial landscapes into multidimensional ecosystems. Every beat of membranous wings created new opportunities for feeding, mating, and escape, while reshaping the behaviors of creatures bound to the ground. From above, patterns of vegetation, watercourses, and early vertebrate movements were surveyed in a continuous dance of flight and perception. These pioneers of the sky were not merely insects. They were the first true masters of air, exploiting niches that no amphibian or reptile could reach. Exoskeletons, light yet strong, provided both protection and support for rapid, sustained flight. Chitin plates interlocked with precision, offering structural reinforcement without encumbering movement, while joints allowed flexibility for nuanced aerial maneuvers. The delicate balance between rigidity and pliancy enabled insects to absorb the stresses of wing beats, which could reach hundreds per minute in smaller species. In Meganeura, the colossal, dragonfly-like predator, a 70-centimeter wingspan, demanded muscular adaptations capable of lifting and sustaining massive bodies across variable wind currents. Every structural innovation translated into ecological advantage, allowing these creatures to colonize the air above rivers, swamps, and forest clearings with unprecedented dominance. Wing articulation allowed precise maneuvering, from hovering among ferns to darting between giant lycopods. Complex veins reinforced wing membranes, distributing forces evenly during rapid changes in direction, while muscles connected directly to wing bases for instantaneous adjustments. Flight was both a weapon and a tool. It permitted surprise predation on smaller arthropods, enabled rapid dispersal to untapped food sources, and provided escape from terrestrial threats. Navigating through towering tree-like plants required more than lift. It demanded mastery of spatial awareness, with wings acting as extensions of a central nervous system finely attuned to turbulence. Obstacles and prey movements. Respiratory efficiency was crucial, with tracheal systems enabling oxygen delivery at rates previously impossible for terrestrial invertebrates. Spiracles line the thorax and abdomen, controlling air intake, while branching tubes carried oxygen directly to flight muscles, sustaining energy-intensive maneuvers. These adaptations permitted extended flights across swampy expanses or between scattered floodplain ponds, where resource abundance varied seasonally. Even slight shifts in temperature or humidity could alter metabolic demand, forcing insects to adjust wing beat frequency, flight altitude, or hunting patterns in real time. Evolution had not merely shaped wings, but orchestrated a complete physiological network to support aerial life. Predation from above introduced new selective pressures for both insects and the animals below. Ground-dwelling arthropods, small amphibians, and juvenile reptiles suddenly faced attacks from the air, forcing adaptations in camouflage, vigilance, and burrowing. Similarly, flying predators competed for territory and prey, shaping diverse foraging strategies and temporal patterns of activity. The sky became a theatre of risk and reward, where size, speed, and maneuverability dictated survival. In this three-dimensional world, dominance was transient, constantly renegotiated through flight, behavior, and environmental awareness. Reproductive strategies shifted alongside flight, as eggs could be laid in previously inaccessible microhabitats. Vegetation overhanging water, crevices in decaying logs, and ephemeral pools provided safe nurseries beyond the reach of many predators. Some species synchronized egg-laying with environmental cycles, timing emergence with peak insect abundance or plant growth, ensuring maximal survival. Flight thus became not only a tool for predation, but also a means of ecological exploitation, expanding the reproductive potential of these early aerial colonizers. Species like Meganeura achieved wingspans up to 70 centimeters, dominating both aerial and forest edge niches. With jaws and mandibles capable of seizing other insects in midair, they operated as apex aerial hunters long before vertebrates attempted flight. Smaller pterygotes occupied complementary niches, feeding on pollen, spores, or detritus, illustrating how size and diet structured early aerial ecosystems. Each species interacted with its environment uniquely, partitioning space, time, and food resources to minimize competition while maximizing survival. These dynamics created complex food webs in the sky, mirroring terrestrial ecosystems, yet unfolding in ways wholly independent of ground-based constraints. Competition among aerial invertebrates drove diversification in size, diet, and flight style, establishing early aerial food webs. Swarms of smaller insects created dynamic clouds of prey and competitors, challenging even the largest flyers to adapt hunting strategies and maneuvering techniques. Wing morphology varied across species, reflecting trade-offs between gliding efficiency, acceleration, and maneuverability. This ecological partitioning encouraged evolutionary experimentation, leading to the remarkable variety of flight strategies observed throughout the late Paleozoic skies. Interactions with plants expanded, enabling spore and pollen transport, contributing to ecosystem connectivity in novel ways. As insects moved from plant to plant, they incidentally carried reproductive material, enhancing genetic diversity and aiding colonization of distant habitats. Flowers had not yet evolved, but ferns, lycophytes, and horsetails benefited from these inadvertent pollination services. Insects became agents of landscape-level change, linking terrestrial productivity to aerial mobility and accelerating the coevolution of plants and animals. By mastering the air, pterygote insects opened a realm of ecological possibility, setting the stage for vertebrates to eventually follow. The skies became not only a domain of predation and survival, but also a medium for evolutionary experimentation, where flight efficiency, sensory integration, and behavioral sophistication could all be tested. From these first aerial pioneers, entire lineages of life would one day inherit wings and take to the air. Yet in the Carboniferous and early Permian, it was the insects that reigned supreme. Their dominance reshaped terrestrial ecosystems below, influencing behavior, plant dispersal, and the gradual emergence of aerial vertebrate life, reminding all that conquest of a new dimension demanded innovation, precision, and a relentless drive to occupy space untouched by others. The swamp giants, early amphibious reptiles. As the first flyers ruled the air, swamps below brimmed with reptiles, testing both water and land, probing the interface between two worlds that demanded very different skills. Massive forms moved with deliberate authority, limbs pressing into saturated mud, while eyes swept the edges of streams and pools, alert for the flash of prey or rival. Each step was a negotiation with the yielding terrain, balancing power with subtlety as their bodies, sometimes exceeding 2 meters in length, flexed to maintain stability. These were creatures whose very anatomy reflected a dual mastery, streamlined for aquatic pursuit, yet capable of traversing forested margins and shallow floodplains without faltering. Massive limbs flexed against saturated mud, revealing a balance between brute strength and careful control. Eriops, one of the largest of these early amphibious reptiles, employed sprawling limbs with musculature designed to propel itself through water while supporting its weight on land. Its robust girdles distribute pressure evenly, allowing it to pivot, lunge, or shift without compromising stability. Nearby, smaller relatives like Dendropeton mirrored these adaptations on a reduced scale, emphasizing that ecological experimentation was not limited to the giants. The interplay between limb mechanics and environmental constraints shaped hunting strategies, territorial movement, and escape behavior, demonstrating an early sophistication in vertebrate locomotion. Heads swiveled with keen awareness, nostrils flaring above water while eyes scanned the forest edge, combining sensory input from both realms. Seimuria, for instance, relied on acute vision to detect insect swarms or smaller amphibians, while monitoring for larger predators that might emerge from deeper pools. Auditory acuity complemented vision, with subtle vibrations in mud or water signaling potential prey or competitors. In hunting, these reptiles employed a deliberate stalking behavior, blending sudden bursts of speed with patient ambush tactics, reflecting an ecological versatility that allowed dominance across both terrestrial and aquatic microhabitats. Teeth and jaws specialized for ambushing fish and smaller amphibians reflected dual ecological pressures. Some species had sharp, conical teeth, perfect for gripping slippery prey, while others exhibited broader, serrated surfaces suited for crushing exoskeletons or plant material opportunistically. Jaw musculature, reinforced by thick cranial bones, provided sufficient force to subdue struggling prey without compromising delicate cranial structures. Feeding sessions often combined careful positioning, environmental observation, and strategic strikes, demonstrating that predation was not merely reflexive, but integrated with environmental cues and energetic efficiency. Seasonal floods dictated migration, feeding grounds, and breeding sites for these semi-aquatic titans. Rising waters expanded hunting territories, opened temporary channels to otherwise isolated ponds, and provided refuges from terrestrial competitors. Conversely, droughts compressed resources, forcing interactions among species and intensifying competition. The capacity to exploit both aquatic corridors and land-based refuges allowed these reptiles to persist in dynamic habitats where resource distribution shifted with weather patterns and topography. Tail musculature acted as both a rudder in water and a counterbalance on land, enabling versatile locomotion. As they swam, lateral undulation propelled their bodies efficiently, while submerged limbs added steering precision. On land, the same tail served as a stabilizing lever, supporting lunges or rapid turns when ambushing prey. This multifunctionality exemplified evolutionary innovation, where a single anatomical structure addressed multiple environmental challenges, reflecting early experimentation with biomechanical integration. Senses extended beneath the water as well as above, granting these reptiles subtle awareness of both prey and rivals. Lateral line-like systems allowed species such as Eriops to detect vibrations from fish, amphibians, or other predators even in murky, sediment-laden waters. Subtle pressure, changes in currents, signaled movement or disturbance, guiding precise ambushes and cautious retreats. Combined with highly mobile eyes and nostrils positioned for partial emergence above the water, these adaptations created a continuous feedback loop of environmental awareness. This dual-domain perception maximized feeding efficiency while reducing vulnerability, illustrating the evolutionary benefits of integrating aquatic and terrestrial senses. Skin texture and possible keratinized patches hinted at thermoregulation strategies across fluctuating environments. In sunlit clearings, dorsal surfaces absorbed heat to fuel activity, while moist undergrowth or shallow water offered cooling during the hottest periods. Slight postural adjustments, such as elevating the head or shifting weight, helped manage internal temperatures and maintain physiological equilibrium. This ability to navigate extremes of temperature and hydration allowed these reptiles to extend activity periods, dominate feeding niches, and exploit resources unavailable to less adaptable competitors. Interactions with other vertebrates, competitors, prey, or opportunistic scavengers illustrated complex ecosystem networks. Juvenile amphibians sought shelter among dense vegetation, avoiding encounters with larger amphibious predators, while smaller reptiles and amphibians adjusted foraging paths to avoid conflict. These dynamics created cascading effects. Predation pressure shaped prey distribution, which in turn influenced plant growth patterns and aquatic invertebrate populations. By acting simultaneously as predator, competitor, and ecological engineer, amphibious reptiles played a pivotal role in structuring late Permian wetland ecosystems. The sheer presence and movement of these amphibious reptiles transformed the very habitats they traversed. Their weight pressed channels through soft mud and undergrowth, creating microhabitats for smaller amphibians, invertebrates, and plant seedlings. Seasonal migrations and foraging behavior redistributed detritus, seeds, and nutrients, subtly altering water flow and wetland vegetation patterns. Shallow depressions, tracks, and temporary ponds formed by their activity served as refuges and hunting grounds for other species, linking aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems in complex ways. Through both behavior and bulk, amphibious reptiles acted as ecosystem engineers, shaping the dynamics of late Permian wetlands beyond their immediate survival needs. Reproductive behaviors leveraged both aquatic and terrestrial microhabitats, optimizing survival for offspring. Egg-laying often occurred in shallow water or damp substrates, protecting from terrestrial threats while maintaining oxygenated conditions necessary for embryonic development. Juveniles, initially confined to water or edge habitats, gradually expanded their range as strength and coordination improved. These life history strategies reflected an understanding shaped by natural selection of the interplay between habitat, resource availability, and predator pressures, a balance between vulnerability and opportunity. In bridging water and land, these giants set the evolutionary stage for the emergence of fully terrestrial predators. The successes and limitations of their semi-aquatic strategies offered lessons in locomotion, sensory integration, and ecological flexibility that subsequent vertebrate lineages would inherit. From ambush tactics in floodplains to careful thermoregulation under variable conditions, the amphibious reptiles of the late Permian demonstrated that survival depended on more than size alone. It required adaptability, intelligence, and an intimate attunement to the rhythms of both water and land, paving the way for a new era of terrestrial mastery. Scaled predators, the pariasaur rivals. From the marshy corridors once dominated by amphibious giants, a new class of herbivore emerged, armored and imposing. Pariasaurs' massive, heavily built reptiles claimed dominion over floodplains and forest edges, their sheer size alone dictating the movements of smaller vertebrates. Unlike the semi-aquatic titans of previous eras, these creatures moved confidently across fully terrestrial landscapes, limbs beneath broad bodies, tails sweeping to maintain balance, and eyes scanning for both sustenance and threat. Their emergence represented a decisive step in terrestrial vertebrate evolution. Survival depended not only on strength, but on defensive sophistication, coordinated behavior, and energy-efficient movement across varied terrain. Thick dermal plates lined their backs, forming a defensive mosaic that absorbed blows and discouraged attacks from gorgonopsids and early therapsid hunters. In species such as Pariasaurus and Scutosaurus, osteoderms fused with the underlying musculature, creating rigid yet resilient armor that allowed the body to maintain mobility while offering substantial protection. Heads were similarly reinforced, with broad, flat skulls and bony projections that shielded sensory organs while distributing the force of predator strikes. Cranial fenestrae suggest some may have had enhanced jaw musculature, enabling both strong bites for vegetation and increased head stability under attack. Evolution had combined form and function, producing a living fortress capable of withstanding both ambushes and confrontations. Muscular limbs carried tremendous weight across uneven terrain, each step revealing both brute force and mechanical precision. Their stout, columnar legs and heavily muscled girdles allowed these reptiles to traverse soft mud, dense undergrowth, and rocky clearings without losing stability. Even when sprinting short distances to evade predators or reposition within herds, their balance remained impeccable, and tail positioning provided a counterweight for abrupt maneuvers. Fossilized limb proportions indicate robust digital pads, suggesting a capacity for traction on wet or unstable ground. This combination of strength and coordination exemplified an evolutionary investment in survival. Mobility was as essential as armor. Herd movement patterns coordinated vigilance and access to food, reducing vulnerability to predators lurking nearby. Parasaurs traveled in small to moderate groups, with larger adults often at the periphery, while juveniles stayed protected near the center. Such formations allowed simultaneous scanning of the environment while minimizing energy expenditure. Trackways from Permian sites support evidence of synchronized movement, indicating deliberate spacing and directionality during foraging. The interplay of social cohesion and defensive awareness reflected a sophisticated understanding, encoded through instinct and refined behavior, that survival depended on collective intelligence as much as on individual size. Juveniles relied on protective positioning within the group, learning both mobility and threat assessment from older individuals. In Bradysaurus, skeletal development suggested that young individuals matured slowly, gaining both strength and defensive features over years of observation and guided movement. Staying near armored adults reduced predation risk, while repeated exposure to natural hazards, mud, waterlogged channels, low vegetation taught essential locomotor skills. Bone histology studies suggest juveniles grew steadily over several years, balancing energy investment between growth, mobility, and the gradual development of dermal armor. Herd-based mentoring thus became a critical ecological strategy, ensuring the next generation's ability to navigate complex environments successfully. Jaw structures and teeth allowed selective browsing, grinding tough vegetation while preserving energy for movement and defense. Broad, leaf-shaped teeth processed ferns, cycads, and seed-bearing plants, while jaw musculature generated substantial force without compromising cranial integrity. Some species displayed wear patterns, indicating repetitive shearing of fibrous plants, while others had slight serrations to manage tougher stems and bark. Seasonal shifts influenced foraging strategies, prompting the parasaurs to exploit floodplain growth during wet periods and low-lying scrub during dry seasons. Feeding sessions combined environmental observation, careful selection, and energy efficiency, a far cry from mindless herbivory, revealing a nuanced integration of anatomy, behavior, and ecology. Predatory eyes and stalking strategies constantly challenged the parasaurs, provoking nuanced, evasive, and deterrent behaviors. Gorgonopsids, though smaller, relied on stealth, speed, and powerful jaws, forcing parasaurs to employ defensive posturing and sudden, coordinated retreats. Tail swipes, shoulder displays, and synchronized herd movement discouraged attacks, while armored heads and spines mitigated the impact of strikes. Bite marks on fossilized osteoderms reveal repeated encounters, suggesting that these interactions drove selective pressures for thicker armor and more robust skeletal structures. Predation pressure drove continued adaptation. Armor thickened, limb coordination improved, and herd behaviors became increasingly sophisticated, reflecting a dynamic evolutionary arms race. Trails and foraging paths carved into floodplains left lasting imprints on the landscape, influencing plant distribution and habitat structure. Repeated movement compressed soils, exposed roots, and created channels that altered water flow, indirectly shaping the local flora and the microhabitats available for smaller creatures. Opportunistic invertebrates and juvenile amphibians followed these pathways, exploiting shelter and feeding opportunities created by the pariasaur's presence. Paleoecological studies indicate that such activity increased nutrient redistribution and promoted heterogeneity in vegetation, demonstrating that these reptiles became ecosystem engineers, with dominance extending beyond size and defense into profound environmental influence. Breeding strategies balanced aquatic proximity and terrestrial security, ensuring high survival rates for the next generation. Eggs were laid in soft, damp substrates near water margins, protecting against desiccation while maintaining oxygenation. Nest sites were often revisited annually, with adults maintaining proximity to safeguard juveniles from opportunistic predators. Morphological evidence suggests some pariasaurs had pelvic modifications, facilitating egg-laying in varied substrates. This dual reliance on environmental features and behavioral care highlighted the evolutionary foresight embedded in pariasaur life histories, blending instinctual and functional adaptations to maximize reproductive success. Interactions with other herbivores reveal niche partitioning and resource management within ecosystems. Pariasaurs coexisted with smaller dicynodonts and early captorinids, exploiting distinct plant layers or habitats to reduce direct competition. Fossil evidence of bite marks on vegetation and skeletal remains shows differential browsing heights, leaf types, and selective feeding, suggesting subtle ecological specialization. By distributing foraging pressure, these large herbivores shaped plant community composition, indirectly affecting insect and smaller vertebrate populations, reinforcing their role as keystone species in Permian terrestrial habitats. In the delicate balance of defense, feeding, and movement, pariasaurs shaped predator-prey dynamics that would echo into later ecosystems. By combining armor, size, social coordination, and environmental engineering, they forced gorgonopsids and early therapsids to refine ambush strategies, emphasizing agility, patience, and targeted strikes. Vegetation patterns, microhabitat structure, and resource distribution were all influenced by their presence, illustrating that ecological dominance was as much about shaping the environment as it was about surviving within it. These scaled giants embodied defensive innovation, preparing the stage for increasingly complex terrestrial ecosystems and establishing enduring ecological frameworks for herbivore-predator interactions. The agile hunters, early archosaur ancestors, where once enormous herbivores dictated the flow of life, small predators began carving niches defined by speed, precision, and strategic acumen. Emerging from the shadows of pariasaurs and semi-aquatic giants, early archosauriforms such as Proterosuchus and Euparkeria exploited the spaces between larger vertebrates, moving swiftly across floodplains and forest margins. Limbs elongated, tails stiffened for balance, and vertebral lightness enhanced mobility, producing a combination of agility and endurance. These creatures exemplified the evolutionary pivot from brute strength to versatility, demonstrating that survival depended increasingly on responsiveness, stealth, and the ability to navigate both topography and competition with calculated skill. Skeletons preserved in early Triassic deposits reveal a mosaic of anatomical adaptations designed for rapid movement and predator efficiency. Elongated hind limbs with reinforced muscle attachments allowed for explosive sprints, while flexible forelimbs facilitated grasping, climbing, and manipulation of small prey. Vertebral columns combined rigidity with subtle torsion, stabilizing the spine during sudden directional changes. Fossil evidence also indicates that tail morphology acted as both counterbalance and rudder, crucial for maintaining speed over uneven terrain. These structural innovations transformed locomotion into a coordinated symphony of biomechanical precision, enabling early archosaur ancestors to navigate complex habitats inaccessible to larger, slower reptiles. Clawed forelimbs and specialized pedal structures illustrate the hunting versatility of these small predators. Manual claws were curved and laterally compressed, optimized for grasping insects, juvenile amphibians, and even small parasaur hatchlings, while pedal claws provided traction on slippery riverbanks or muddy forest floors. Foot morphology varied slightly between species, reflecting habitat specialization. Some adapted to open floodplains with rapid sprints, others to dense undergrowth requiring agility and stability. The integration of limb mechanics, claw functionality, and body mass distribution exemplifies how early archosauriforms evolved a multidimensional predatory strategy that relied on both anatomical efficiency and behavioral cunning. Skull structure and dentition further underscore their predatory sophistication. Euparkeria and similar taxa possessed elongated jaws with pointed, serrated teeth capable of piercing and gripping a variety of prey. Robust jaw musculature enabled rapid strikes without compromising cranial integrity, while sensory organs were positioned to maximize environmental awareness. Orbital enlargement suggested acute vision for detecting subtle movements, and some semicircular canal evidence indicates advanced balance and spatial orientation. These adaptations allowed early archosaurs to time attacks precisely, coordinate lunges, and pursue prey with an efficiency that smaller size alone could not explain, reflecting an intricate integration of anatomy and behavior. Sensory acuity extended beyond vision, incorporating auditory and vestibular systems fine-tuned for predation and survival. Inner ear morphology in Proterosuchus indicates a sensitivity to ground-borne vibrations, allowing the detection of approaching predators or the tremors of fleeing prey. Acute hearing complemented visual tracking, creating a multimodal awareness of the environment that guided both hunting and avoidance strategies. Even subtle shifts in vegetation or water currents could inform decision-making. These sensory innovations provided a competitive advantage over other small vertebrates, enabling early archosaur ancestors to exploit microhabitats efficiently while minimizing exposure to larger dominant predators. Deliberate locomotion patterns are recorded in fossilized trackways, suggesting coordinated stalking, sudden bursts of speed, and agile maneuvering. Individual footprints indicate alternating stride lengths consistent with acceleration and deceleration phases, while tail drag marks reveal balance adjustments during rapid turns. Some track assemblages imply group movement or serial hunting behavior, with spacing indicating communication or territorial awareness. By analyzing these patterns, paleontologists infer that early archosauriforms combined mechanical skill with behavioral intelligence, adapting strategies to different terrain types and environmental constraints. Locomotor versatility became a cornerstone of ecological success, allowing these small hunters to occupy niches overlooked by larger reptiles. Fluctuating water levels and shifting vegetation density shaped environmental pressures that influenced habitat selection and hunting behavior. Seasonal rains, expanded rivers, and created temporary ponds, offering aquatic prey opportunities, while dry periods concentrated terrestrial invertebrates and juvenile vertebrates into confined spaces. Early archosaur ancestors navigated these shifting resources with remarkable adaptability, exploiting both aquatic margins and forested corridors. Their ability to integrate sensory input, locomotor skill, and opportunistic foraging demonstrates an evolutionary advantage that favored cognitive processing and flexible behavior. Success depended on reading the landscape, predicting prey movements, and adjusting tactics in real time, early lessons in ecological foresight. Interactions with contemporaneous predators drove selective pressures that refined both speed and strategy. Gorgonopsids and large therapsids posed constant threats, necessitating vigilance, rapid response, and escape planning. Fossil evidence of limb proportions, tail morphology, and body mass distribution suggests that early archosaurs balanced predation avoidance with effective hunting. Some species likely relied on camouflage or nocturnal activity, while others exploited dense undergrowth for ambush tactics. Each encounter with larger predators or competitors contributed to the refinement of movement patterns, reaction times, and tactical innovation, demonstrating that agility and intelligence could offset the advantages of sheer size in the Permian and Triassic landscapes. Reproductive strategies are aligned with environmental pressures, balancing the protection of offspring with resource access. Nesting sites were often chosen in elevated or concealed locations near water, providing moisture for egg development while minimizing exposure to predators. Juveniles grew under the protection of sheltering vegetation or the vigilance of older siblings, gradually acquiring locomotor coordination and hunting skills. Growth rates inferred from skeletal analysis suggest staged development, where size and agility increased in tandem with predatory competency. These reproductive and developmental adaptations reinforced survival across generations, ensuring the persistence of agile predators capable of exploiting complex terrestrial ecosystems. In exploring prey selection, early archosaur ancestors displayed remarkable dietary versatility. Dentition and jaw mechanics allowed consumption of insects, small amphibians, and juvenile reptiles, while opportunistic feeding on carrion supplemented energy intake. Hunting behavior was adaptive, varying with season, habitat, and prey availability. Fossil stomach contents and tooth wear patterns indicate selective consumption and efficient processing of nutrients, emphasizing the integration of diet with locomotion, sensory perception, and environmental assessment. These combined strategies reinforced a balance between energy efficiency and predatory success, a template that would later inform the ecological dominance of larger archosaurs. Through a combination of agility, sensory integration, and behavioral sophistication, early archosaur ancestors established the foundation for vertebrate predatory innovation. By favoring speed, coordination, and environmental awareness over bulk, they exploited niches that larger reptiles could not, setting the stage for the eventual rise of dinosaurs. Their adaptations influenced prey behavior, predator strategies, and habitat dynamics, demonstrating that ecosystem impact could be achieved through precision rather than size. In these small, versatile hunters, the principles of vertebrate dominance, agility, cognition, and environmental mastery were already emerging, foreshadowing the ecological revolutions that lay ahead. The burrowers, prehistoric mammal precursors. Beneath the watchful eyes of larger predators, small synapsids slipped through shadowed undergrowth, moving with an agility that belied their size. Limbs adapted for digging and rapid movement allowed them to exploit narrow tunnels and dense vegetation alike. Every step was calculated, balancing energy conservation with the constant need to evade larger carnivores. Their nocturnal habits reduced encounters with dominant reptiles, while heightened sensory systems, keen olfaction, sensitive tactile hairs, and acute auditory perception enabled these diminutive hunters to thrive in habitats where stealth and environmental awareness dictated survival. Claws scraped against compacted soil and root-laden earth as these creatures excavated intricate tunnel networks beneath leaf litter and fallen logs. Burrows varied in complexity, from short escape passages to labyrinthine chambers with multiple entrances and concealed exit points. These networks not only provided refuge from predators, but also created microhabitats with stable humidity and temperature, shielding inhabitants from extremes of heat and cold. The architecture of these burrows reflected both instinctual engineering and learned behavior, with repeated use reinforcing tunnels while adding new chambers for foraging, nesting, and social interaction. Fine body coverings are insulated against nighttime chills while minimizing moisture loss in arid microenvironments. Short proto-hair or dense epidermal layers trapped warmth near the skin, supporting sustained activity in fluctuating temperatures. This insulation, combined with rapid adjustments in posture and burrow depth, allowed small synapsids to remain active throughout the night while conserving energy for foraging and predator avoidance. Occasional sunlit excursions during twilight hours were brief and deliberate, balancing thermoregulatory needs with the risk of exposure, revealing a sophisticated interplay between physiology and behavioral ecology. Sensitive nostrils, elongated vibrissae, and slit-like eyes allowed continuous monitoring of both air currents and substrate vibrations. Every twitch, scrape, and whisper of movement was detected and processed, enabling rapid responses to threats or opportunities. Auditory and tactile cues often proved more reliable than vision in dimly lit environments, guiding navigation through complex tunnels and across uneven terrain. By integrating these inputs, small synapsids could anticipate predator movement, detect prey, and maintain spatial orientation, demonstrating a level of sensory sophistication that allowed dominance in shadowed, competitive niches, despite their modest size. Hidden chambers within burrows provided secure nesting areas, protecting eggs or juvenile offspring from predation while maintaining stable environmental conditions. Some species nested solitarily, conserving space and resources, while others displayed communal arrangements where multiple individuals shared interconnected networks. Nest placement reflected careful selection of moisture, insulation, and escape routes, maximizing juvenile survival. Adults remained vigilant, patrolling tunnel entrances or guarding chambers when necessary. Through these behaviors, reproductive success was enhanced without exposing the group to the dangers of the surface, illustrating an evolutionary strategy where concealment and cooperation were paramount. Teeth specialized for insectivory or omnivory allowed selective, energy-efficient feeding in constrained environments. Conical teeth gripped soft-bodied invertebrates, while broader, leaf-shaped teeth processed plant material opportunistically. Feeding sessions were deliberate, often combining pauses for sensory assessment with precise strikes on moving prey. Burrow-adjacent foraging minimized exposure to larger predators and reduced energetic expenditure, emphasizing efficiency over risk. Seasonal and environmental variations influenced diet composition, prompting synapsids to alternate between subterranean hunting, edge foraging, and opportunistic surface feeding. reflecting an ecological versatility that balanced nutritional needs with safety. Vibrational awareness extended beyond predator detection to spatial mapping and communication within the burrow system. Subtle tremors through soil or detritus indicated movement of conspecifics, prey, or rival species. By interpreting these signals, individuals could coordinate movement, avoid conflict, and locate food caches or nesting sites. Burrow maintenance and navigation relied on a continuous feedback loop between tactile input, learned experience, and environmental cues. This integration of sensory processing with physical action demonstrated an advanced form of environmental mastery, allowing synapsids to exploit subterranean and semi-surface ecosystems with remarkable efficiency. Nutrient-rich microhabitats within the burrow network became essential hubs for resource acquisition. Waste deposits, decaying plant matter, and small invertebrate colonies concentrated in tunnel junctions, creating localized feeding zones that could sustain multiple individuals without necessitating risky surface foraging. Some synapsids actively manipulated soil and detritus to encourage insect activity, essentially cultivating mini ecosystems within their tunnels. This behavior not only supplemented their diet, but also demonstrated an early form of environmental engineering, showing that even small vertebrates could shape their immediate surroundings to improve survival and energy efficiency. Predation pressure from nocturnal or burrow-entering reptiles shaped both behavior and morphology. Quick reflexes, flexible spines, and low-slung postures enabled sudden dives into tunnels or rapid lateral escapes along surface corridors. Tail flicks and sudden bursts of speed were employed to misdirect attackers, while coordinated retreat patterns among multiple individuals increased survival odds. These adaptive behaviors reflected not only immediate survival strategies, but also longer-term evolutionary responses, favoring synapsids capable of nuanced movement, environmental awareness, and behavioral flexibility, ensuring persistence in habitats dominated by larger, more powerful predators. Young synapsids learned survival through guided exploration, observing adult navigation, foraging, and predator evasion. Juveniles practiced burrow construction, prey capture, and tunnel orientation under adult supervision, gradually acquiring the skills necessary for independence. This behavioral mentorship optimized learning while minimizing exposure to danger, promoting efficient acquisition of motor skills, sensory processing, and social coordination. The combination of protective guidance, structured learning, and iterative environmental interaction ensured that each generation retained and refined the knowledge critical to thriving in complex, shadowed ecosystems, laying the foundations for traits later amplified in true mammals. Small, nocturnal synapsids, endured by mastering concealment, integrating with their environment, and sharpening sensory perception, persisting despite larger predators' dominance. Burrow construction, social behavior, thermoregulation, foraging strategies, and predator evasion combined to create a living system of adaptation and survival. These creatures exemplified the principle that ecological influence could be achieved through intelligence, versatility, and precision rather than sheer size. Their nocturnal, subterranean lifestyle not only ensured survival, but also established behavioral and anatomical patterns that would resonate through evolutionary time, foreshadowing the rise of mammals as dominant vertebrates capable of exploiting hidden and complex ecological niches. Lurkers of the shallow seas, primitive sharks. Hidden nighttime synapsids had mastered the art of evasion on land, while in the shallow seas, early sharks quietly asserted their own dominion. These aquatic predators thrived in coastal lagoons, river mouths, and nearshore environments, where currents and vegetation created both obstacles and hunting opportunities. Streamlined bodies, flexible tails, and specialized fins allowed them to navigate complex underwater terrain, while sensory systems, finely tuned to vibrations and electrical fields, gave them a decisive advantage. Here, in the interplay of predator and prey, these sharks began to perfect hunting strategies that would shape the oceans for millions of years. Body structure reflected a balance between speed, agility, and stealth. Even modestly sized species like Cladocellaceae or Stethocanthus displayed fusiform shapes that reduced drag and maximized efficiency in water. Muscular tails delivered bursts of acceleration, while stabilizing fins maintained control during sharp turns or rapid ambushes. Jaw design and tooth arrangement varied among species. Some had serrated edges for gripping slippery fish, while others developed blunt, crushing teeth for hard-shelled invertebrates. Scales, small but densely packed, minimized turbulence and provided subtle protection against both predators and conspecific rivals. Every anatomical feature was optimized for survival in these dynamic coastal habitats. Hunting relied on sophisticated sensory integration. Lateral line canals running along the body detect minute water movements, allowing sharks to locate hidden prey in murky waters or beneath submerged vegetation. Electroreceptors on the snout sensed the weak electrical fields emitted by muscles and hearts, revealing prey otherwise obscured by sediment or shadows. Vision, particularly adapted to low-light conditions near estuaries or under reef overhangs, complemented these systems. Together, these senses enabled sharks to execute ambush attacks with precision, coordinating tail propulsion, fin adjustments, and jaw strikes to minimize energy expenditure while maximizing success in capturing elusive targets. Different prey types and seasonal availability dictated feeding strategies. Some species specialized in small schooling fish, executing rapid strikes with lateral swipes of the tail and snapping jaws, while others scavenged or targeted benthic invertebrates, probing soft sediments with snouts and fins. Opportunistic behavior allowed sharks to exploit ephemeral concentrations of prey, responding to shifting tides, river influxes, or seasonal spawning events. Foraging efficiency depended on energy conservation, striking a balance between effort and reward, demonstrating an early sophistication in predator behavior that went beyond brute force to include environmental awareness, timing, and selective targeting. The ways animals hunted and defended territory were influenced by social interactions. While many primitive sharks were solitary, some congregated in small groups, particularly in areas rich with prey, creating dynamic and competitive microenvironments. These temporary aggregations enabled coordinated hunting opportunities, allowed individuals to gauge competition, and facilitated the establishment of dominance hierarchies based on size, speed, and agility. Even subtle displays, such as dorsal fin posture or body positioning, communicated intent and dominance without confrontation. Such behavioral nuance indicates that survival relied not only on physical adaptation, but on cognition and situational awareness within a complex ecological framework. Reproduction and life cycle were intricately tied to environmental conditions. Shallow bays and estuarine channels offered protection for developing embryos, with some species laying eggs in hidden areas while others retained live young to reduce vulnerability. Hatchlings and juveniles occupied sheltered zones, relying on dense vegetation, shallow water, and stealth to evade larger predators. Growth rates, feeding behaviors, and habitat selection were calibrated to both energy availability and predation pressure. ensuring survival during vulnerable early stages. This interplay of reproductive strategy, habitat use, and behavioral adaptation highlighted an evolutionary pathway that emphasized survival through both anatomy and learned or instinctive behaviors. Adaptations to environmental variability were critical. Sharks encountered fluctuations in salinity, water temperature, and current strength across rivers, estuaries, and nearshore seas. Muscular control, tail flexibility, and fin modulation allowed them to maintain stability in turbulent conditions, while sensory systems detected subtle shifts in water chemistry and movement. Some species displayed seasonal migrations, moving between deeper channels and shallower feeding grounds to exploit prey abundance or avoid competition. Their versatility and resilience in diverse aquatic environments underscored the selective pressures shaping anatomy, behavior, and ecological strategy in the early oceans. The push and pull of predator-prey dynamics fostered continual innovation. Sharks competed with other vertebrate predators, including early bony fishes and larger placoderms, requiring strategies that combined speed, timing, and stealth. Tail strikes, rapid lunges, and jaw snapping evolved to counter evasive prey tactics, while schooling behaviors in prey species prompted further refinement of hunting efficiency. The arms race between predator and prey fostered anatomical and behavioral specialization, influencing fin placement, tail musculature, sensory acuity, and cognitive responsiveness. Every encounter contributed to shaping the early ecological networks of shallow seas, creating feedback loops of adaptation and counter-adaptation. Territoriality and environmental influence extended beyond hunting. Trails left by repeated swimming paths modified sediment distribution, while foraging behaviors impacted invertebrate populations and vegetation along riverbanks or submerged reefs. Sharks acted as ecological engineers, indirectly shaping the abundance and distribution of prey, which in turn affected secondary consumers and habitat structure. Their presence imposed selective pressures on other species, encouraging faster, more agile, or better protected forms. Through these interactions, early sharks became more than predators. They were critical agents in structuring ancient marine ecosystems, with effects that rippled through food webs and influenced long-term evolutionary patterns. Observations from shallow waters offered indirect lessons for terrestrial ecosystems. The strategies perfected by primitive sharks' speed, sensory integration, targeted predation, and environmental awareness would echo in land-based predators millions of years later. By mastering water currents, prey detection, and stealth, these hunters set a precedent for ecological dominance achieved through intelligence, versatility, and precision rather than sheer size alone. The shallow seas, patrolled by these agile and adaptable predators, became a proving ground where the principles of hunting, competition, and survival were refined, offering a blueprint for future apex predators across both aquatic and terrestrial realms. The end Permian survivors, seeds of the dinosaur world. The ripples of ancient seas had scarcely faded when terrestrial landscapes were forced to confront unprecedented devastation. Scorched floodplains, ash-strewn forests, and watercourses poisoned by volcanic runoff became arenas where survival demanded flexibility, precision, and vigilance. Species that had once thrived under predictable seasonal cycles now faced an unstable world where only the most adaptable forms endured. Small reptiles and synapsids navigated fragmented habitats, exploiting cover in hollow logs, burrows, and scattered vegetation, sensing opportunities in the void left by extinct giants. Every movement required calculation, balancing energy expenditure against potential risk in a land that seemed hostile at every turn. Scorched floodplains and fragmented forests became arenas where only adaptability determined survival. Plants, too, responded to upheaval, with drought-resistant ferns, hardy cycads, and rapidly germinating seed plants, establishing the first patches of stable greenery. These vegetative islands provided shelter and food for herbivorous survivors, creating microhabitats that allowed localized populations to persist. Opportunistic feeders shifted diet breadth, consuming tough leaves, seeds, and insect life, while water-dependent species tracked the erratic flow of streams and ephemeral pools. Ecosystem structure, once dominated by sprawling vertebrates, was now a mosaic of patches, corridors, and refuges that rewarded mobility, awareness, and environmental mastery. With cautious calculation, small, versatile reptiles navigated broken habitats, exploiting hidden resources where larger competitors had disappeared. Archosauriform ancestors and nimble diapsids moved with light, springy steps across unstable ground, climbing over fallen logs, navigating muddy banks, and slipping into shaded undergrowth. Their compact frames minimized energy costs while allowing rapid bursts of speed, crucial for both hunting and evading predators. These hunters relied on keen vision to detect movement at a distance and acute olfactory cues to track prey. Environmental intelligence, reading water currents, wind direction, and plant cover, became as critical as raw agility, shaping behavioral strategies that would echo for millions of years. Synapsids that had mastered nocturnal concealment now spread into niches once dominated by larger predators, balancing speed and stealth with opportunistic feeding. These small, shadow-adapted creatures explored burrows, leaf litter, and fallen logs, foraging at night to reduce competition and predation risk. Sharp teeth and flexible jaws allowed them to consume insects, amphibians, and available plant matter, integrating dietary versatility with careful energy budgeting. Sensory sophistication, including tactile whisker-like structures and enhanced auditory perception, compensated for reduced visibility, creating a model of ecological adaptability where precision and timing outweighed brute force. Clinging to dwindling watercourses, amphibians relied on their physiological flexibility to endure shifting climates and sporadic droughts. Limbs adapted for both swimming and hopping facilitated escape from drying pools, while skin and respiratory adaptations enabled efficient moisture retention. Seasonal migrations followed temporary waterways, exposing populations to novel predators, competitors, and plant assemblages. These movements redistributed both genetic diversity and ecological influence, ensuring that amphibians continued to play a central role in shaping aquatic terrestrial interactions, despite extreme environmental stress. Vegetation adapted as well, with hardy seed plants, ferns, and cycads rapidly colonizing open ground, providing both shelter and sustenance. Opportunistic herbivores exploited this renewed greenery, nibbling leaves and seeds that had been left untouched during the collapse. Plant recovery created microclimates that moderated temperature extremes, offered shade, and supported insects and invertebrates, establishing new food webs. The resilience of flora, paired with herbivorous survivors, generated feedback loops that stabilized localized habitats, demonstrating that ecological recovery depended on the interdependence of species rather than the dominance of any single group. The dance of scarcity defined predator-prey interactions, emphasizing timing, positioning, and restraint over brute strength. Nimble archosauriforms coordinated hunting with environmental awareness, stalking weakened or slow-moving prey along dried riverbanks or into dense vegetation. Synapsids avoided exposure during peak predator activity, emerging strategically to forage where ambush risk was minimal. Even small environmental cues, ripples in mud, shifting wind, or fleeting shadows could trigger rapid responses. In this system, intelligence, timing, and subtlety determined success, creating an evolutionary laboratory for adaptive behaviors that would define Mesozoic predators. Ensuring survival through repeated mortality cycles, reproductive strategies evolved toward protection and effective dispersal. Eggs were laid in insulated soil pockets or moist vegetation mats, minimizing desiccation and exposure to opportunistic predators. Juveniles adopted cryptic behavior early, relying on cover, slow movements, and parental or communal guidance in selecting safe foraging grounds. High fecundity, combined with flexible nesting and dispersal choices, allowed populations to persist despite fluctuating mortality rates, highlighting the evolutionary advantage of behavioral plasticity during environmental instability. Ecosystems themselves reorganized, establishing new food webs and spatial hierarchies that would influence Mesozoic evolutionary trajectories. Predators and herbivores adjusted territories and foraging routes, while invertebrate populations expanded to fill niches left vacant by extinction. Water sources, plant density, and microclimatic zones became critical nodes in the ecological network, dictating interactions at multiple scales. Feedback between species shaped habitat structure, promoted biodiversity in microhabitats, and reinforced behavioral adaptations, demonstrating that survival was a systemic challenge requiring holistic environmental awareness. The cataclysm left behind the foundations for a new era, gradually preparing the way for dinosaurs to inherit a restructured and fertile Earth. Species that thrived were not the largest or fastest, but the most adaptable, capable of integrating sensory input, behavior, and physiology to survive extreme conditions. These survivors established the rules for terrestrial life in the early Mesozoic. Mobility, opportunism, and environmental attunement mattered as much as strength or armor. By persevering through chaos, they created ecological templates that would guide the evolution of later dominant vertebrates. Studying these survivors reveals that resilience depended on more than survival. It required innovation, foresight, and versatility. Burrowing, nocturnality, dietary breadth, and sensory refinement allowed small species to persist and multiply where others perished. Ecosystem recovery was a patchwork of pockets where life endured and evolved in response to scarcity, predation, and habitat shifts. From these survivors, the stage is set for the dinosaurs to inherit the Earth, concluding the pre-dinosaur saga while linking to the next great chapter of life. In the shadowed swamps, across shifting floodplains, and beneath turbulent seas, life experimented, adapted, and endured long before dinosaurs claimed dominion. These creatures, armored, agile, and ingenious, remind us that survival is as much about ingenuity as strength, and that the patterns of life are written in resilience and subtle mastery of the world. As the echoes of their reign fade into deep time, we are left with a vision of Earth as a crucible of endless possibility, where every creature, great or small, shapes the story of life. If this journey fascinated you, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe.